Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's so good to see all our friends here for this session. We're going to be talking to Mr. Yasser Latif Hamdani about his book, which is called Jinnah, A Life, and this is the book. And it's an honor to have you with us today. Mr. Hamdani is a corporate lawyer, and he has a keen interest in digital rights in particular, and just to mention that he was instrumental in getting YouTube reactivated very recently. He has studied economics at Rutgers University, USA. He's also a barrister. He did his bar at law from Lincoln's Inn. And he's got an LLM and an LLB degree. He has been a fellow of the Asia Society as well as a fellow at Harvard University Law and Human Rights. So in light of all his qualifications, I think he's an avid admirer of Mr. Jinnah. And so he's been writing. He's written an earlier book called Jinnah, Myth and Reality. And this book is also a biography, which is basically one of the most balanced biographies I've ever come across between Jinnah Saab's political and his personal life. So we're going to be talking to him about the book and various aspects of the book as it progressed. Particularly, I would like to start off that how difficult was it balancing the personal and the political life of such a complicated man, and writing about it the way you did.
Yes, I think, am I audible? Yes, I think. So I think Mr. Jinnah is the kind of person who it's not easy to write about him.
Exactly.
Because he is, like you said, a very complicated man, a very complex man, with a background that, if you think about it, he starts from somewhat of a middle-class family. His father's a hide merchant, goes all the way to England, goes there to clerk actually, and then ends up becoming a barrister, and before trying actually to become an actor.
Exactly.
Right, so that's
and a Shakespeare actor at that.
Yes, he was. He wanted to play Romeo on stage. This was sort of the big thing. So yes, Jinnah is a very hard person. Now, obviously, his marriage, especially with Rati Bai, or Miss Rati Jinnah, as she became known as later, and then his relationship with his daughter, and obviously his own relationship with his sister as well. All these things are so interesting, and they also directly play a role in his political life.
Absolutely.
So Rati Jinnah, for example, provided an inspiration, or should I say she was a muse in terms of Indian nationalism for Jinnah. Fatma Jinnah, when it came to protecting Muslim rights and talking about Muslim nationalism, as it were, that's where Fatma Jinnah came in. And then, of course, there was the inherent tension between father and daughter that we know about, which has been written about, though I must add here, and I must make it very clear that Jinnah never disowned he never disowned his daughter, contrary to what has been said. So I think, yes, balancing that out, but when you look at Jinnah's life holistically, which is what I wanted to do, because my first book, as you said, were all about politics, just politics. But I think in order to understand how it was that this man who was coming from somewhat of a humble background came to a point where the entire elite of the Muslim community in India, as well as other communities, stood with him or stood against him. Either way, he was a man who could not be ignored.
Exactly.
So I think we have to understand the personal dimension, the fact that he was a minority within a minority, right? He was a Shia Muslim who actually had converted from Ismaili Shia to Itna Ashari Shia.
Yes.
So there were all those, and then ultimately it was Qua Muslim. Remember, Jinnah is the only politician who famously said, "I am an Indian first, second and last."
Yes.
So how did a person who was from this particular background, how did he end up making Pakistan when he himself has started off his journey in a very different direction.
Exactly. So now this brings me to the next one, that yes, we all know that Mr. Jinnah started off as a nationalist and a huge champion of Hindu-Muslim unity. But how then did this journey continue, and particularly when you refer to him as a consociationalist? Can you please explain to our audience what that term means and what role it played in his politics and then for his eventual, demand for Pakistan?
So it's interesting. Consociationalist, I think this word was invented actually much later. But when you apply, so this is one of the models so this was a Netherlands political scientist. I think what happens in divided societies, because remember there was no India before the British came. Contrary to, so this myth of there being an indivisible India, the fact of the matter is that when British took over, there were about 8 to 9 different smaller states and confederacies which were brought together and made into one India, and then there were obviously the 560 princely states that were there. This was an utterly divided society, and the two major divisions were Hindus and Muslims. Now, Hindus and Muslims, I know it's not a very fashionable thing to say, but the way they did interact historically was antagonistic, right?
Okay.
So you had to come up with a system, because you were building a new country, India, not Pakistan yet.
Yes.
We're talking about India.
Right.
How are you going to figure out the numerical advantages and disadvantages? How was it that you were going to have an equipoise between Hindus and Muslims, where these identities which had existed, I mean, it would make to go back to consociationalism, because this is a term that I come back to again and again. Consociationalism is a form of democracy that brings together divided societies. You have Hindus and Muslims in India. Now, India had to be built ground up, because there was no India before the British came. So it was really the British bayonet that kept India together. Now, once that was being built up, you had to figure out a way of how Hindus and Muslims would interact, what would be their social contract with each other. So that was what Hindu-Muslim unity was all about. They had to come to a situation where Hindus and Muslims would come to an arrangement where there would be numerical parity, not necessarily parity in numbers, but at least there would be consensus on both sides. So say, for example, if there was a law that was being passed which affected Muslim rights, that itself then would have to be also passed by a majority of Muslims. So that is what consociationalism is. It's like consensus, having a consensus democracy instead of a majoritarian democracy. So yeah, that's what
and that's what he was championing.
And that's what he championed after 1920 onwards.
Till 37?
Till 37, and also one would argue, as Aisha Jalal has done very well, and I know a lot of people have tried to bring down Aisha Jalal, but they've failed miserably in my opinion.
I agree.
Aisha Jalal's thesis is that Jinnah was ready to come to an arrangement with the Congress party, and on the basis of a united India, provided there were consociational solutions. So the most that Jinnah wanted, and his idea of Pakistan was a subunit of a confederation between Hindustan and Pakistan that together formed India.
And where the rights of one minority was sort of guaranteed by the
others, yes. So you had minorities on both sides. There would be reciprocal arrangements between these federations which would come together as a confederation. Because if you look at the Lahore resolution, I'm sorry I'm getting a little technical, but then I'm a lawyer, unfortunately. But if you look at the Lahore resolution and read it, there's a word that occurs in it. It's called constitution. Even though if it meant two separate states, then it should have said constitutions. It should have been plural, but it doesn't. It uses the word constitution. So what I'm trying to say is that Lahore resolution itself, when we look at it, was completely in consonance with the idea Pakistan could have existed in parallel to a greater united India as well. So it could have been a federation within, and Jinnah was perfectly ready to accept it. It was just that the Congress party especially Jawaharlal Nehru, who was a centrist
Yes.
for his socialist ideas and everything. He was, even though I must also add that Muslim League itself had and this is something that I've tried to bring out in the book, its manifesto was also socialistic.
Yes, because that's what I was
Daniel
going to-
Latifi,
Yes,
yes,
Daniel Latifi was a member of the Communist Party, was
Yeah.
seconded to
Exactly,
the
exactly.
League to write their
And
constitution.
he's the one who wrote
Yeah.
the manifesto. But in any event, Jawaharlal Nehru and Jinnah, the equation was that Jawaharlal Nehru wanted a centrist state, which would have all the powers lying, and as it is in India right now, there's this concept called the residuary powers. Sorry, I'm sort of
No,
becoming
please,
technical
please.
here. Those vest with the federation, not with the provinces. In Pakistan, it's the other way around. So I think that was so ultimately, had they come to an arrangement on the basis of the federal structure, there wouldn't have been a separate Pakistan. There would have been a Pakistan, but that would have been in an Indian Union.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, in this respect, what about the relationship of Jinnah with the various leaders, like Gandhi, Nehru, then amongst the British with Churchill, and then finally with Mountbatten? What you've just described and that impasse that came to be, were these relationships extremely important in that? And what sort of relationships were these that he had with these four people?
Yes. First of all, I must say that there are fractured relationships and founding fathers, as it were. When we look at the United States, for example, you had Alexander Hamilton on one side and Thomas Jefferson on the other.
True.
But they managed to figure out a way to work together. Jawaharlal Nehru and Jinnah and Gandhi were extremely talented. All three of them were extremely talented statesmen. Unfortunately, their personality clash came to a point where they couldn't. So, for example, Gandhi and Jinnah, the obvious fissure between them was that Gandhi had brought religion into politics.
Right.
Remember, it was Gandhi who brought religion into politics, right? With the Khilafat movement, not just the Khilafat movement, but Ahimsa, Satyagraha, and all of these. So there was this massive dragging in of religion into politics that Gandhi did, and Jinnah obviously broke away from him on that particular point, on that particular thing, because he was like, I don't want anything to do with this mixing of religion and politics,
Okay.
So Jinnah's personality clash with Gandhi was because he thought Gandhi relied on his inner voice. His inner voice was everything, and so Jinnah actually was a very rational, sort of a 20th
Logical,
century
yes,
figure.
yeah.
He was unwilling to sort of pay second fiddle to a person who was so superstitious, as it were. So I think there was that. With Nehru, it is interesting. Nehru and Jinnah were very similar in sort of, they were both anglicized, they were both sort of modern Renaissance men of the 21st century. But Nehru and Jinnah didn't get along from the get-go. There was this incident that happened in 1936, I believe. They were together, and where Nehru just criticized Jinnah in his speech, saying that whatever he's doing, he's a communalist and communist, or he's someone who's trying to drive fissures into the society. And Jinnah, obviously, having worked so hard and the only politician to be called the best ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. There's no other politician, if you think about it. For him to be called that, he took it personally. So there was a lot of personal anger between Nehru and Jinnah, and also Jinnah and Gandhi, because of this personality clashes. So I think if they had worked, there was a way of working together. But I believe, and you can call me sort of partisan towards Jinnah in this. I mean, I admit. But I think as the majority party, it was given to Gandhi and Nehru to come to an arrangement with the minority party. Minorities, obviously, minoritarianism is not a problem. Majoritarianism is a problem.
Of course.
So I think Nehru's all or nothing approach is what caused a complete separation or an eventual break between Muslim League and sort of.
And what about Jinnah's relationship with Mountbatten?
Right. So Mountbatten, unfortunately, I mean, and this is something that if you've read something about the man Mountbatten, he was a very vain person. He was also very concerned about how he's going to work. So he was very close friends with Nehru. His family was entangled with Nehru's, and so he was not a very impartial arbiter of partition.
Exactly.
And that, I think, comes out when we look at the fact that there was a partition plan. There was a partition plan before the original partition plan, which would have resolved a lot of issues. And instead of showing it to Jinnah and Nehru together, he showed it to Nehru. Right. So yeah, so there was this Mountbatten believed that Jinnah was a psychopath. So that was the thing. And Jinnah actually thought of him as very dishonest, sort of a perfidious Albion, as it were. That's what Jinnah thought of Mountbatten. So yeah, there's that. And I think you wanted to also talk about Churchill?
Churchill, yes.
Right. So Churchill and Jinnah got along, but not for the reasons that people think. Churchill was someone who had come to appreciate the fact that when you have 90 million people, that 90 million people, the number is not merely a minority. That it has a certain unique characteristic that makes it a nation. Remember, two-nation theory, and this is something that I think should be spoken about, it isn't what Pakistan Studies says it is. Let me be very clear. And it's certainly not what Indians say it is. Two-nation theory, like you said, the word consociational, it was a consociational theory which wanted to bring an equipoise to the subcontinent. That was the purpose of the two-nation theory. I think Churchill saw that, and Churchill had a good personal equation with Jinnah on that issue, and so he came out very strongly in support of Jinnah and the Muslim League in the British Parliament.
Okay.
Of course, that because Churchill was such an imperialist, people love to cite this as an example that perhaps the British and Jinnah were in, bed together, which is, in my opinion, just pure
that
hogwash.
was not true.
Hogwash, yes.
Okay. So how do you then can explain that the Pakistan that we got, we do get this impression that Jinnah was not totally satisfied with it, but he still went along with it. Why do you think, what were some of the imperative reasons that made him
Go
along with it?
Well, I think when the June 3rd plan was passed, Jinnah was very optimistic that he would be able to convince the Sikhs, for example, in Punjab to remain with Pakistan, right? So that's why he gave them a blank check, said, take whatever you want to take, have maximum autonomy for a small Sikh state as well, but stay with Pakistan. So I think at that time he expected that all of Punjab would fall into Pakistan and all of Bengal because he believed, and this might sound, it's considered a contradiction, but it was not really a contradiction if you look at Jinnah's career as a whole. The fact that he considered that a Punjabi was a Punjabi before he was a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh, and he also he's famously said that, and he said a Bengali is a Bengali before he's a Hindu or a Muslim. So because he believed that there were these sub-nationalisms, so he said all of these provinces should then group together and become a federation. Okay. So on June 3rd, this is what he thought. He thought that Pakistan would include
the whole of Punjab and the whole of Bengal.
And once it did, then there would be reciprocal arrangements between Pakistan and India, or as he called it. Remember, there was a naming dispute. Jinnah objected vociferously to the naming of Hindustan. He called it Hindustan as India. He said there is no India without Pakistan. That without Pakistan there couldn't be an India. India is the entire superset, and Pakistan is a constituent part of it, and Hindustan is another constituent part of it. So I think his idea of this super Indian state above Hindustan and Pakistan was something that would have worked, but this partition of Punjab and Bengal, which was again, I'm sorry if I'm taking too much time.
No, no, not at all.
But,
Please,
okay.
we'd love that.
Yeah, I think if you look at the historical facts, it was the Congress party and the Hindu and Sikh legislators of Punjab who voted to divide Punjab. There were two different votes that took place. There were Hindus and Muslim members of the Punjab Assembly were given a right here to vote separately, and then the Muslims were given another right to vote separately. And in these separate sort of things, Muslims voted to keep India united.
Right.
Oh, sorry, Punjab
United.
Punjab
yes.
United. Forgive me. Punjab United. And it was the Sikhs and Hindus who voted to divide it. Right? So I think that was something that Jinnah didn't expect. He thought that at some point greater sanity would sort of prevail and they would come together. But of course the Hindu and Sikh argument was that if it's all right for us to stay in Pakistan, why can't you live in a united India?
But there would have been a sizable majority of Muslims living in India as well.
Yes,
I mean, so
exactly.
that was what the quid pro quo would have been in that
and
sense.
that would have been the reciprocal
Yes.
arrangements in one constitution of this super state India on top of Pakistan and Hindustan.
So then Pakistan is made, and we have the August 11th speech and the speech Jinnah made at the State Bank inauguration. And a lot has been said about both of these, and people have used it in various ways. How would you explain those?
Well, I think when you look at the 11th August speech, I think there can be two opinions about it. He's clearly arguing for a state where religion is a personal matter, where ultimately Hindus and Muslims would cease to be Hindus and Muslims but would become Pakistanis. So that's his eventual hope. So in a nutshell, it is the encapsulation of a secular vision for Pakistan, that Pakistan should be a secular state. Now the thing with, and it's not just the State Bank speech, but there's another one in Karachi as well.
Yeah.
Jinnah talks about Islam, right? Now a lot of people, and this is something that I've tried to explain in the book as well, a lot of people say that's again a contradiction. But Jinnah was trying to convince, if you look at those speeches, both sort of the State Bank speech where he talks about Islamic economic system and that sort of, Jinnah was trying to argue to his Muslim constituents that Islam is in perfect consonance with the idea of a modern, inclusive, secular democracy.
Right.
So on January 25th, 1948, for example, he says, why do you think it's going to be in conflict with Sharia? It is not in conflict with Sharia. If we establish, because Islam has stood for equality, fraternity, and justice and democracy for 1300 years. So this is what, now as a politician he couldn't have argued otherwise. Now a lot of people, those who argue that Jinnah was actually, even though Jinnah said it clearly on several occasions that Pakistan shall not be a theocratic state to be run by priests with a divine mission. He said it again and again, and there are about 40 odd speeches where he's spoken about equality of citizenship for all Pakistanis. So the fact that he referred to this, you can't take that and as sort of nullifying everything he said about Pakistan not being a theocratic state, right? So there's that. And when you come to sort of, and a lot of people who obviously with good reason criticize it, so there are writers and authors and stuff who like the simplistic narrative, and they're like, oh, so Jinnah said this, therefore he was either contradicting himself or he was always an Islamist theocrat. But the fact is that a lot of these people just are not ready to accept that perhaps there can be an interpretation of religion, interpretation of Islam that doesn't put it or pit it against
Democracy,
secular
secular
democracy,
democracy.
right? So
yes.
and that kind of takes us all the way back to the origins of the Muslim modernist movement that ultimately led to Pakistan, with Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and all those people. They were arguing for a modernist, progressive interpretation of Islam.
Exactly.
And I think that was, if there was, so here's the thing. One of the things that I write in the book is that Jinnah's references to Islam were ontologically emptied. It didn't matter if you were a good Muslim. Pakistan was created because Muslim minorities needed an equipoise in the subcontinent. It was not created in order to create a theocracy and persecute minorities, which unfortunately is what
It happened,
Yeah.
yes. But that was another thing, the Jamiyat-e-Ehrar, which you mentioned quite a lot in your book, was totally against Jinnah and called him all sorts of things because they felt he was promoting a secular, totally secular sort of a style.
Absolutely, a lot of people did criticize him, and then he had to go the extra mile to say that what I'm saying, while it is modern and westernized and secular, is also an Islamic principle.
Yes.
And that is the modernist argument that modernists, Muslim modernists have been using for a while. So.
Okay, and so now coming back to something which we were discussing earlier, and your wife happened to say something, that how writing this book was such a therapeutic experience for you because you had just come out of a life-threatening episode where you had been diagnosed with a brain tumor, and you'd had you were writing this particular book, and your basically admiration for Jinnah is what got you through that episode. Could you perhaps share a bit of that with us?
Yes, so thank you for bringing that up. I mean, my wife actually has been such a pillar of strength.
I'm sure.
You know,
yes.
and in many ways, I must, before I answer that question, I should do that shout out to my wife, because she has been such a pillar of strength, and she's the one who's an inspiration. We've known each other for 20 odd years. We met in college. And one of the things that we did come together on was Jinnah.
Jinnah.
You know, because she is a patriot of par excellence. You know, she's just... So what happened to me when obviously I had 2 surgeries which were awakeniotomies on my brain, the brain tumor, and I almost died, you know. And during that, it is around that time that my agent contacted me from India. So this book was originally published in India. And he said that, and then I thought I found a purpose. So there was that. And I think Jinnah, for most of my life, has buoyed me. He's put me on this, you know, I became a lawyer because of him. I became a barrister because of him. So I became a lawyer, then became a barrister, retrained as a barrister. All of that because I, had this one figure that I look at, and things like, I mean, one sort of sees, one tries to follow the law because Jinnah followed the law. So there's this thing, right? I mean, the Christians in the West say WWJD. What would Jesus do? I say WWJD, what would Jinnah do? So I think I've had that. So yes, and I must say again, like Jinnah was, it was the women in his family, right? The 3 women that he especially drew strength from. And I'm lucky to have very strong women in my life as well. So,
excellent.
So that is something that, to answer your very first question, the reason why I was so interested in sort of talking about the personal life as well was because I had seen, I have my wife who's just this extraordinary person, but I also have my mother who's a doctor and has been there, and my daughters who are very strong. So I saw a lot of that
yourself,
there.
You do parallels.
The parallels there. Okay. So I think that was one of the things.
That's excellent. So just one last question, and then we'll open up for some questions and answers, for a Q&A session. So we got Pakistan. Jinnah got Pakistan for us at the detriment of his own life in a way. And his last year and a half, how would you describe that as? What were his feelings? I mean...
Well, I think at the very end, when he was about to die, and this is controversial, but I think he threw out a challenge to the Pakistanis of the future, us. He said that I think I've made a mistake, that making this country perhaps was a mistake because it's not turning out to be quite what
I had
expected.
thought.
Yeah. I think that challenge, I mean, people say, okay, fine, the words that he used were supposedly, and these are reportedly, I should say reportedly because there are 3 or 4 people who reported this. He said, Pakistan is the biggest blunder of my life. I think that is an onus on us to prove him wrong. That it was not your blunder but we haven't done that, right? I mean, and so
We came up short.
we came up short because we had an excellent country. We could have realized the potential, we could have become, but look where we are right now, with default and that sort of thing, and the kind of politics and the fact that we've been ruled half our history by an unconstitutional, military intervention, as it were. So I think that is something that Jinnah would have been very, very upset about, and I think it is up to us now to actually go ahead and prove him wrong and say, old man, what you did was not a blunder. You gave us this country, and we lived up to our promise
Yes.
and potential.
Good. I totally endorse that. We have about 15 minutes. Can we have some questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I heard somewhere that Jinnah wants relationship with India just like Canada has with America. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And the term that Jinnah used was the South Asian Monroe Doctrine, which was to keep, he wanted Pakistan and India to have a joint defense pact and armies that would work together instead of against each other. So I think his whole idea was a very US-Canada version of it. And even more so, he expected originally, remember, he was actually aiming for a federation when he accepted the cabinet mission plan. And nobody, those who, because obviously this is something that upsets the nationalist balance on both sides, India and Pakistan. The fact that Jinnah accepted the cabinet mission plan, the fact that he was ready to give up on the maximum demand and agree to this sort of
Truncated, sort of.
a part of a greater whole, of Pakistan, right? The fact that Jinnah did that is something that, stands as a sore thumb in sort of the easy, simplistic nationalist narratives that, we've been fed, both sides. I think if we look at it in sort of a holistic, first look at Jinnah holistically, but also look at some of these struggles, I think we can definitely see that Pakistan and India have the potential of becoming that, but in order for that to happen, and by that I mean US-Canada, right? But for that to happen, we have to first go back to the basics and understand why the country was created, and how the country was created.
Thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much, both of you. It's been very informative listening, and you have given us so much, to ponder upon. But I want to ask you, particularly because we have done a lot of research, surely, that in the present day Pakistan, which political figure do you think is closest to Kai's ideology?
Well, I must say there aren't any.
There aren't any.
There aren't any. And I'll tell you, and that's the thing, you're not going to have another Jinnah. But people have had the opportunity to be that, but they failed. The potential was there. So historically we saw that Zulfikar Bhutto was a great charismatic leader who could have been another Jinnah, but then he made so many compromises that it became, so he ended up, I think if you are to talk about the current lot, they all are problematic if you think about it. Even, the one person that I had once pinned my hopes on when I was younger, Mr. Imran Khan, unfortunately his politics is so agitational, he stands for things today that Jinnah stood against. His party stands for things. For example, I'll give you an example, that Jinnah famously said in 1944, and again this is, one of those things that when you talk about, you kind of look over your shoulder and see if, but I'm going to assume this is a safe space and talk about it. Jinnah in 1944 was asked a direct question. and this is another sort of things that I think that I've been writing about. So he was asked if Qadianis or Ahmadis should be in the Muslim League, why shouldn't they be thrown out? He said, anyone who calls himself a Muslim is a good enough Muslim for me. I am not going to turn them out of the Muslim League. And on the contrary, now what we see is that their very lives have become, it's not just their lives, even dead Ahmadis, are being dug out of graves and thrown out.
Yes.
So, it's
Yes.
that kind of discrimination. And with Imran Khan, the reason I particularly was disillusioned by Imran Khan was what he did in 2017 with the whole Election Act amendments, which was all about this. So I think that, I thought that's the one person you wanted me to talk about. So.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
This idea of a super state in South Asia, naturally it hasn't happened. But the successor to that was SARC. And that too has failed. So, number one, who do you think is responsible for the failure of SARC? Is it the descendants of Gandhi and Nehru, or is it the descendants of Jinnahs? And will it ever be that we will have a South Asian super kind of structure like the European Union or ASEAN or other regional blocs?
I think so. I think ultimately world
Based
is...
on your research, what do you think?
I think ultimately yes, but I'm more interested in sort of the earlier part of the question, who's responsible. I think for most part we have people on both sides. One of the things that I like to argue about Pakistan is that there are no descendants of Jinnah. There
No
are
descendants of
because
Jinnah.
people, and this is something, I'll tell you why that I feel that way. If you look around today, and I'm going to be sort of blunt and frank about this now. In Pakistan, you have people who, and I mean the religious clergy, that oppose the creation of Pakistan. They've become what they were, sort of, one would call the Chacha Mamas of Pakistan, right? I mean, that's happened. And on the other side, you have people, who call themselves secular liberals, who question the very basis of Pakistan and say Jinnah was wrong. There are some of those as well. But this idea, the idea that we have this ownership, Jinnah is our man, and we're sort of trying to strive for a secular democracy in Jinnah's vision. There are no takers for this view anymore. Unfortunately, there are no takers. I mean, I wrote this book and I thought, maybe if I can just show people that this was what Jinnah stood for, people would come and agree. Unfortunately, all I've seen over the last few years is that the society has become more polarized between these two opinions. No one actually is concerned about taking Pakistan towards a progressive modern future. People either wanted to just end Pakistan. Unfortunately, a lot of people just want Pakistan to end. And others want to transform it into this theocracy, which, by the way, we are halfway there. So that's what it is.
Ji, please. We'll come to you just after this. I promise. Yeah. Ji.
Exactly.
Why was 1940 such a turning point in Mr. Jinnah's politics towards an Islamic state?
Yeah, I think by Islamic I'm assuming you mean a Muslim state. Yes. I think 1940 he wrote an article in this magazine called The Time and Tide of India, in which he explained, and this is where the word Consocationalism I apply, he spoke of joint governance of our common motherland of India between Hindus and Muslims. So I think by that time he had come to the conclusion that whatever solution that you're going to have has to reimagine the subcontinent, that for example, the very fact that there's a unitary center of India is now a questionable thing, and that which is rightly so. There was no unitary center before the British came. British gave it the unitary center. So Jinnah made that is sort of his turning point as well. He realized that he had been working towards on a wrong premise, that there could be top down. What we need to do is build bottom up a union, and that could work if we could agree to a constitution that everyone agrees to. The Muslim majority agrees to, as well as the Hindu majority agrees to, and other minorities agree to. So I think that was the turning point.
I've got two questions to ask. First is that we say that Jinnah was the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. But if we go deep into the Muslim nationalism in India, Sir Sayyid's concept of utilitarianism in K.K. Aziz's book was also the same. Later, after Hindu-Urdu controversy in 1867, he converted into an egalitarian leader. So, how do you see Sir Sayyid and Jinnah as two, ambassadors of Hindu-Muslim unity? And the other question is that as you mentioned in your book, that during cabinet mission plan, Jinnah agreed to the concept of ABC3 sort of federation within a confederation. So how do you see the Chaudhry Rahmat Ali's pamphlet Now or Never and his concept of another confederation and the similarity between them?
These are very interesting questions. I think the first part about Sir Syed Ahmed Khan and Jinnah, this is very interesting that, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan in many ways is one of the founding fathers who only belatedly has been recognized with that 75 rupee note recently. But I think Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's idea of modern polity, so there were differences between Jinnah and Sir Syed, right? Sir Syed Ahmed Khan actually believed that Muslims should stay away from Congress. Jinnah actually went into the Congress and became a congressman, leading congressman. Contrary to what Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's advice had been, that Muslims should stay away from the Congress, right? But ultimately Jinnah realized that in sort of as politics democratized in the subcontinent, it would become more communal, right? They would become more communal. So there was that. So ultimately Jinnah came around to Sir Syed's vision. Now your second question about Rahmat Ali is very interesting, because Rahmat Ali's Pak Asia Federation, the idea that he had of Farooqistan and Usmanistan,
yes.
Farooqistan, and then several others, and then you had Pakistan and Bangladesh Islam, for example. So he had these very creative names, and so the man was, a very interesting sort of a genius but his ideas about what the subcontinent should look like at the end, I think, were very different from what actually was possible. So Jinnah was a realist. Rahmat Ali was a political idealist. We don't have to agree with everything that he idealized, but he was a political idealist, whereas Jinnah was a realist. Jinnah got what had to be gotten, what could have been gotten, right? And Rahmat Ali, that is why he was so disillusioned. He came to Pakistan and he obviously was very bitter against Jinnah, because he thought that Jinnah had betrayed the Muslims. So I think there was that, yes.
Please, last question.
Thank you so much. I just want to know, as you mentioned, that like Sir Syed and Jinnah, all of these people are either Muslim traditionalists. So what I thought or what I think, that Pakistan is stuck between the Muslim traditionalist and Muslim modernist. So what you suggest, I thought we need some kind of social contract as a nation state of governance, because our survival is at stake. What do you suggest, what kind of social contract, new kind of social contract it should be?
Yeah, I think this distinction between traditionalists and modernists is a very important one. Fazlur Rahman, not the Maulana Fazlur Rahman, but the other Fazlur Rahman, who was a professor at Harvard, and he was made part of the Islamic Research Council by Ayub Khan as well. He actually wrote a very interesting book where he mapped the traditional modernist, traditionalist divide, and he showed that the entire Pakistan idea was based on this premise of Muslim modernism. And I think Iqbal Ahmed, in one of his articles on Pakistan movement and Jinnah, wrote about this. That there was this modernist Muslim nationalism that had emerged in the 1930s, and that is what ultimately led to Pakistan. I think Pakistan has to go back to those modernist roots because Pakistan cannot. So that tension is always going to be there, but Pakistan has to have a reformist Islam, right? Otherwise, you would continue to have, because what happened after the 1980s with General Zia, and before that even, you know, with the, I think at some point Pakistan went from 1956 constitution where it was an Islamic republic, but interestingly enough, 1956 constitution didn't have a state religion.
Yes.
There was no state religion and the Prime Minister of Pakistan under 1956 constitution could be a non-Muslim. In 1973, state religion was added and ultimately Prime Minister had to be a Muslim as well. So 1956, if you think about it, was closer to sort of the UK British model that Jinnah and others had, and the earlier sort of generation of founding fathers had. So,
last, please.
So my question is that you made a point that Mr. Imran Khan talked about Latif, that he removed him after all that stuff happened, and he added him into the cabinet. And in 2014, back in 2014, he said that we will add up some professionals like Latif and others who are good in economics and stuff like that. But I was very cautious about why he did that, because I have also heard an interview of on Muslim TV, Qadiani, Ahmadi Maulana, that he said that Mr. Imran Khan contacted them in 1997 when he made the Saab. So what I heard that he gave an interview to BBC, he said that, look, I can't fight all these at one time. So I have to make compromises, but my dream is same. So what do you think that Mr. Jinnah also made compromises, but not on the main mission, but just go to that mission, don't have to that mission. So do you think that Mr. Imran Khan also did the same thing?
well, I think Imran Khan has made too many compromises. So because I think, yes, Imran Khan has to, as a politician, any politician in Pakistan has to act within sort of the parameters of our society, which has become radicalized and has become. But there are certain things where, so for example, when I talked about Jinnah was under a lot of pressure in 1944 on the Ahmadi issue. You know, they were like, we're not going to support you, we're not going to support the Muslim League because you have Ahmadis, or, you know, as they called it, Qadianis and Mirzais in the Muslim League. Therefore, we are never going to support you. And Jinnah was like, nothing doing. I'm not going to back down on this issue because, you know what, they've supported me and they say they're Muslims, so they're Muslims. I think any leader has to. So if say for example Imran Khan wants the mantle of Jinnah, then he should have the character and the upstanding moral character that Mr. Jinnah had. And Jinnah was, whatever you say of him, whether you agree with him or not, was a man of great integrity, intellectual and otherwise, as well as a lot of moral character. Where once he decided, he said, I'm going to put my foot down here, I'm not going to back down. And one expected that, you know, since Imran Khan always comes up. I'll tell you, when I was a young person, I joined Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf in 1997. I expected that from Imran Khan, but I was very disappointed and disillusioned by him because he is not another Jinnah, unfortunately.
Okay, so on this note, we end this session, and thank you so much, Yasser. It was such a pleasure talking to you and getting to know how you came about to write this book, which I think should be bought and read by everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.